history, Jewish history as a vehicle to belief in God. And so I'm going to speak about, oh, Zalman, absolutely. How are you doing?
Well, I asked them, I go to every Friday night. I asked them to call me. Nobody's called me. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, I'm going to call you this week, Zalman, for sure.
What about the rest of the men in Shul? I called the men in Shul. All the men in Shul, they surely have their number. Nobody's called me.
Julie's going to be on my tail. We're going to do that. So
have them call me.
Absolutely.
The oldest person there on Friday night. I go walk. I say all the prayers. And without pain. Well,
I just want to get a glass of water.
In Israel, they can't call me from.
Just while Ravavi walked away to get a cup of water, I just want to let everyone know that I'm going to mute you just so we don't hear your background noise. And after Ravavi teaches, when he, opens it for questions and comments, you may need to unmute yourself before you share pitches.
Actually, this morning we have.
Call me.
Yes.
They didn't call me at all for 5 days. That's not right.
You know what, Zalman? I think we're going to have a day. We're going to call it Zalman's Day. And everyone is going to call. We may do that, Zalman.
I go every Friday night. I done with a walker every Friday night.
Well, Zalman, you are so right. I have to do better in calling you because you are a precious
all the men should call me though. The men should call me.
Yes. I couldn't agree more.
Send us Zalman's phone number.
Who's asking?
I am Danny Langton.
I will send it to you. Thank you.
Have somebody call me. That's all. It's 5 minutes. 4 days.
Okay, Stuart. I'll talk to you in a little bit. I need to mute everybody now, so I'm sorry for cutting you off. Okay.
Stuart, we love you. All right. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Yeah. No, you can put Zalman back on just for a minute. It's okay.
No, he's on. Just everybody's background is quiet.
Okay.
Everyone's on.
All right. So we're studying one of the most enigmatic, complicated questions, and that is whether belief in God is a commandment. Is it a commandment to believe in God? We all know that the first of the Aseret HaDibrot reads, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Stop the average person in the street and ask them whether belief in God in Judaism is a commandment. And I would imagine that most who have a modicum of knowledge of Judaism would say, yes, it is a commandment. But, well, let me say that certainly Maimonides agrees. Maimonides wrote a book called Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of Commandments, and it's divided between the 248 affirmative commandments and the 365 prohibitive commandments. And in his affirmative commandments, number one was Emunah B'Hashem, to believe in God. In fact, when we sing the Yigdal, which is really a synopsis of his 13 principles of faith, right away, right in the beginning, we speak about Yigdal Elokim Chai v'Yishtabach, Nimtza ve'ein et, and so on. We talk about God. God is God. Believe in God. And if somebody were to ask Maimonides, but I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, is not written as a commandment. The Bible says things like, Lo tirtzach, don't murder, lo tinaf, that one should have absolute fidelity, don't commit adultery, These are commandments. Kabed et avicha v'et imecha. Honor your father, honor your mother. I am the Lord your God is not written as a commandment. But by a sleight of hand, the Rambam points out that the verb to be is sometimes to be inserted in the text. There are texts that are elliptical, that is, they're kind of obtuse. And although it says, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, read it as I am to be the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. And that is a mainstream approach. But I wanted to dedicate our few words of learning this morning to an alternative approach. How many times in my rabbinate, how many times have people said, the Bayit's not for me, Rabbi, I don't believe in God, I've lost my belief, I'm an agnostic, I'm an atheist. I actually think most people are atheists, they're not agnostics. The difference is an agnostic firmly says there is no God, and atheist is not sure one way or the other. And yet I would say, come. I also would like Shuli to send to everyone the piece that we did in the symposium, Torat.com, on whether the Torah was written by God. And there were a whole bunch of people.
I'm gonna put the link for that in the chat since I don't have the emails for everyone on the class, especially with our new friends on. So I'm gonna put the link to that in the chat.
Okay, maybe if people could read it, maybe this could be the subject of our discussion next week, the humble position that I took and why I took it. And beyond that, I'd like to say this, that if you believe means that there has to be, what did Kierkegaard call it? A leap of faith. If I'm absolutely certain, doesn't certainty belie belief? Now, I don't want to get too fancy a philosophy, but belief is a feeling. It's a feeling. And a feeling is not right. A feeling is not wrong, as we would say in marriage encounter. A feeling just is. In love, how do you know we're in love? We know we're in love that I know I can share with you what I feel, and I'm not going to be ridiculed. I'm not going to be mocked. It's my feeling. Again, I love that line. Feelings are neither right nor wrong. They just are. Or to say it poetically, feelings are feelings are feelings. And belief, I think, fall into the same category. It's a belief. It's a jump. It's a leap of faith. In fact, there are medievalists like Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson. He writes that there is no proof of God's existence, because if there was, it's one of two things. Either it means your proof is wrong because God can't be limited to a proof, that would limit God, or secondarily, there is no proof because the best proof that there is God is there is no proof. Proof limits. But I'm especially interested, without doing somersaults here, it's a feeling. And what happens if I don't feel like believing in God? Now, Tova, as usual, said something beautiful last week that I've been thinking about when we've had a loss, we say, blessed be the true judge. And the question I asked was, wait a minute, somebody has just lost someone so close. Can I say, blessed be the true judge after somebody so close lost life? And my response was that I fully understand one who can't say it. And I'm sure that Tova would agree. We have to make room for people's feelings. But your response, Toba, was that one is looking at the whole picture. If one can look at the whole picture of life, in the midst of the angst, of the pain that somebody has left this world, there were so many good moments. There's much even to celebrate if one has the capacity at that instant of piercing loss to think about the broader group. But what I want to argue this morning is the following: that I am the Lord your God is not a commandment. We are not commanded to believe in God. We're not. As a matter of fact, this is one of the biggest differences between Judaism and Christianity. In Christianity, if you've ever seen any of the evangelicals or listened to any of our Catholic brothers and sisters, every single sermon talks about one issue. Salvation comes from Jesus. You have to believe. And if you don't believe, you're damned. It is the dogma. It is number one in their educational curriculums. In Judaism, belief in God is very central, but that's not what Judaism is about. And that's what I want to talk. That's what I want to deal with. If it's not about that, even though belief is so central, that is to say, I don't think you can be a good Christian if you don't believe in God. Let me put it this way. Can you be a good Jew if you don't believe in God? Can you be a good Jew if you're not sure about God? And so what I want to argue again is that I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt is not a commandment. It's not written as a commandment. It can't be a commandment because it's a feeling, but rather that line it provides a formula through which one can come to believe in God. A formula through which one can come to believe in God. And here I want to look for our point of departure at the first time of revelation in the book of Exodus. And the first time of revelation occurs at a place which sounds like Sinai, and that's the Sineh, the burning bush. As a matter of fact, we've discussed this in the past. Both took place in the same spot in Chorev through the medium of fire. The mountain of Sinai was aflame, and the burning bush was just that. It was a flame, she'edenu ukol. It would not be consumed. And it was then that God tells Moses, take the Jewish people out of Egypt. And Moses says, I'll go to the Jews and they're going to ask me, what is your name? And what is your name means, a name is not just a name is descriptive of who we are. What Moses was asking, what Moshe was asking is, they can ask me, who is God? What is God? How can I prove God to them? They're slaves, they don't know better. And God in chapter 3, sentence 11, let's take a look at this. Chapter 3, sentence 14. So Shuli's going to get this on our screen. And this is what the text says. God says to Moshe, I'm opening it up in my text if you have it. It's in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, sentence 14. Here's what it says. Sentence 14. In fact, let's take it at the end of 13. At the end of 13, it says, V'amruli mashmo, and they will say to me, the people, what is God's name? Mo omar alehem, what should I tell them? And look at what God's response is. Vayomer Elohim el Moshe, and God said to Moshe, Eheyeh asher eheyeh. Tell them that my name is, I will be that which I will be. I want to look at that again. Vayome Elohim el Moshe. This is God speaking. Eheyeh asher eheyeh. If it's possible to get the Rashi on that sentence, that would be good. If not, it's fine. In the meantime, I'd like to face everyone. So when God says to Moshe, tell them, Eyeh asher eheyeh, in most Bibles, the way that is translated, it's translated, I am that I am. I am because I am. It's a cognitive idea that's actually called the cosmological argument. God says, I am independent and self-existence. We have to say, I am, each of us. We are, each of us, because our parents were. Our parents are because their parents were, going all the way back. It's only God who could say, I am because I am. That actually is the way Maimonides understands this. This is one of his proofs of the existence of God. But that's not what the text says. Eheyeh asher eheyeh doesn't mean I am that I am. Eheyeh asher eheyeh means I will be that which I will be. So I want to read to you from the Mechilta. The Mechilta is a rabbinic Tannaitic work on the book of Exodus. And this is the way the Mechilta, and this is quoted by the great Rashi, this is how they interpret Eyeh asher eheyeh. God says to Moses, I'm now putting in my own words. Moses says to God, let's play role. God, they're going to ask me, what is your name? Proof of your existence. The name defines who we are.
I think I do have the Hebrew of it if you want, I think.
Okay, yes, please. So God responds, and basically God says, I have no name. Nobody can define me. You can't put me in your back pocket. If you could define me, then you've limited me, then I'm not God. God says to Moses, I really have no name. I can't be proven. Being proven is too limitative. Now I'm adding these words that Moses says to God, thank you, but no thank you. I need your help. What shall I tell the Jewish people? And if you can just push it down a little bit, just a little bit further down, here it is, top right-hand side. This is what God says. Tell the people, Eheyeh imam b'tzarazu. I shall be with them in this sorrow. Asher eheyeh imam b'shibud sha'ar malchiyot. As I will be with them in other sorrows. I want to read that again. I'll do the translation. Tell the people, not I am that I am. That's not a proper translation. Tell them I will be with them. And from the darkness of Egypt, they will be redeemed. They'll be freed. I will be with them in this tzara, as I will be with them in other tzarot. I'll be with them now in their moment of travail, as I will be with them in the future in those moments of travail. Now, if I can face everyone. So what's being said here is, to the question of Moses, they're going to want proof of your existence. God is saying, there's no cognitive proof. You can't intellectually prove God. Every proof, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the ontological argument, each of those proofs have their limitations. They're beautiful proofs. They're evidences of God. There's a difference between evidence and proof. It can't be a full proof if I said, as I've said a full time, because if it's a full proof, I've limited God. Can't be a full proof. If it's a full proof, you don't believe in God. You have the proof. So God says, I'm not the God of dogma. I'm not the God of the intellect. I am rather, now open your hearts and souls, dear friends. I am the God whom you encounter. I am the God that you can experience. And from the depth of that encounter, from the depth of that experience, you will come to know me. You will come to know me. And so God says in the Aseret HaDibrot, in a similar fashion, God says, I am the Lord your God. Now you would think if somebody was a PR agent of God, writing out God's resume, what would they write? They would write, I am the Lord your God who created the heavens and the earth. That's what they would write. That's not what it says. It says, this is pointed out by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, quoted by the Ibn Ezra, makes this point as well. It's not I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. It's not I am the Lord your God who created the heavens and the earth. Why not? That's sweet, and that's an argument for the existence of God. We all come from something, and the first something comes from nothing, and it's only God who can create ex nihilo yesh mayim, yada, yada, yada. But that's not the God of experience, because there was no one there other than God. At the elementary level, however, when does God encounter the people? God speaks of the Exodus because it was a phenomena that had been witnessed by the entire nation. And so the Mechilta, that same Mechilta, says, you may be confused. Why may you be confused? Because here I am, God says, I am like the Rebbe, like the compassionate teacher who's giving you the Torah. That's what you're experiencing. And yet you also experienced me, God says, like a warrior, like a general who took you out of Egypt. And perhaps you're going to say that I am therefore a dichotomy. Therefore, I am a dualistic God. There are two gods. There is the God of power and the God of compassion. Hence, this is the way they interpret this saying. Onochi, I, the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. The Lord your God whom you experienced, and I'm going to come back to that word, encountered, I love that word, whom you encountered and experienced as a Gibor, as the ultimate power, who released you from the greatest power in the world where you were enslaved. That same God who took you out of Egypt with such infinite strength is the same God who was compassionate to you. Don't think it's two Rishuyot. Don't think it's two gods. It's one God. I'm going to read it inside. Lefi shenigla bayam ki gibor milchama. Since God revealed himself at the sea like a warrior in battle, v'nigla kan kizaken malei rachamim. And here, when giving the 10 declarations, 10 commandments, God reveals himself full of mercy. Hoel v'ani mishtaneh b'marot. Since I alter my form, not so much my form, since I alter in the way I'm revealing myself to you, al tomru shtei rushuyotein. Don't say that, therefore, there are two gods, but onochi, I, asher hoseiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, the same God who took you out of Egypt, the same God who took you out of the land of Egypt, I am the God who is giving you the Torah. Here, this revelation is parallel to what's happening at the sneh. God is saying, the Jews will come to know me through these experiences. In this sense, This is the key. Belief in God. Oh, let me offer an example that maybe makes this a bit understandable. How does one know that one is in love? How does one know? I know virtually everybody. I hope I'll come to know the people from Shar Shemayim. How do we know I'm in love? How did we know that somebody whom I lost was somebody I loved deeply? How do I know that I love my children, my siblings, my spouse, my partner? If I have to sit down with pen and paper and to logically write out, well, this is the positives of my relationship, these are the negatives of my relationship, the sum total is, through my head, through my intellect, there's love. If that's the way I come to my conclusion that I love, I'm in trouble. How do I know that we're in love? It's I've experienced my beloved. And through the depths of that experience, I come to know that I'm in love. I just know that I'm in love. That's where, it's like the teacher who says, I don't believe in God. I know God exists. I don't believe I'm in love. I know I'm in love. How do I know I'm in love? I'm experiencing the love in all kinds of different ways. So here what God is saying to Moses is, the Jews will come to know God through these experiences. In this sense, belief in God is similar to knowing you're in love. Just as you can't prove you're in love, it can only be experienced. So too belief in God is an experiential reality. I just want to speak for another few minutes, and I know and I'm eager to hear what you have to say. So open your hearts. I would argue that one of the most powerful understandings of God, of belief in God, emerges when assessing how against all odds we as a people have endured. After all, as Toynbee and other historians have pointed out, a rational assessment of the forces of history would conclude that Judaism today should be a fossil. When we think about it, the Greeks were much stronger than we were. The Romans were much stronger. The Byzantines were much stronger. The Persians of old were much stronger. And they're no more. They're not here. But we are. We would respond against all odds, against everything that is historically logical. We would respond that Jewish history is not logical. It's not rational. The improbability and vast breadths of Jewish history points to the existence of God. It works both ways. There's a God, and therefore we've survived Jewish history. But one of the ways we can come to an understanding of God is through the journeys that we've taken, through our experiences, through our still being here. One comes to a belief in God. And as I've often said, what is true about Egypt is true about almost every phase in history. What we're arguing is that God says to Moses, I will be with you and release you from Egypt, as I will be with you in other Egypts. Because the Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim. And Mitzrayim, vocalized differently, is Mitzarim, distress. Mina meitza karatika, out of distress I called upon you. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar ma'od. The whole world is a very, very narrow bridge. So when God says from the experience of Egypt, you will come to know me, what God is really saying, through all of the Egypts, throughout history, you'll come to know me. After all, Mitzrayim doesn't only mean Egypt. The word derives, as I pointed out, from the root tzara, suffering, or tsar, distress. Its plural form suggests that after the Exodus, there would be other Egypts in history, inquisitions, pogroms, and more that we would miraculously survive. Now, I'm not saying that there wasn't a downside. Of course, there was a downside. I'm thinking now of that moment of the first survivors conference at the Kotel. Thousands were there, including many people from the Bayit, Corolla and Henry Greensburg, and of blessed memory, Irving and Helen Bolzen of blessed memory. So many were there. And the keynote speaker was Menachem Begin, who was then the Prime Minister of Israel. And he's looking out at a community of survivors and 6 million of our people, one third were destroyed. Begin used to tell the story that when he was negotiating the peace agreement, the Camp David Accord, so he was very strong. He wanted to make sure that as he was giving away land to Egypt, he wanted to make sure that Israel was secure. And Carter, I was no fan of Carter, but Carter turned to him and Carter said, "Why are you so obstinate? What are you always saying no, no, no?" He said, "My primary responsibility is to make sure that as I'm giving away, my people are secure." And Carter pushed him and pushed him. And Begin stood up on his feet and he says, "You don't understand, Mr. President. Our people were tertiated." That's the word he used. Our people were tertiated. So Carter looked at him and he said, what does tertiate mean? And Begin explained that the word decimate means 1 in 10. When one says we were decimated by the Romans, let's say, in the beginning of this coming era, 1 of 10 were lost. Tertiated means in the Holocaust, 1 of 3. That was a horrific experience beyond description. And still Begin rose with all of that in mind, in the spirit of what Tova said about Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Without making light of the loss, no one can make light of the loss. He rose and gave one of his shortest speeches, according to the story. He looked out and he said, "Brüder und Schwestern, brothers and sisters, Schwestern und Brüder, my sisters and brothers, wir sind da." That was it. We are here. Wir sind da. In other words, through the experience of Jewish history, that in the world today, look what we have experienced with all of the challenges, and the challenges are deep. But we have seen in our time one of the biggest freedom movements, I think, bigger than the exodus from Egypt was the exodus of Soviet Jews from the former Soviet Union. That's the real deal. That Black brothers and sisters were carried on the plains of El Al, not in the bowels of ships across the Atlantic to become slaves, but they were carried on the wings of eagles to be free in Israel. The majority of Israel today it's a country where people, thank God, they're people of color. Ethiopian Jews, Black Jews are marrying white Jews are marrying Black Jews. What a glorious freedom movement. We're seeing the B'nai Menashe. We're seeing the resurfacing of the 10 tribes. We're seeing it right before our eyes. Reshit Smichat Geulatenu. And so this is now my last point. We've argued so far that Jewish history may be a formula, a means through which one can come to believe in God. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense. So Jewish ritual can be seen, what I want to suggest, as a reenactment of Jewish history. Let's think about Jewish history. What do we do? On Passover, for example, We recall the exodus from Egypt, that experiential moment. But we don't only recall it, we reenact it. We eat the bitter herbs to remember the bitterness in Egypt. We lean on the left side to emulate those moments when we were freed. We drink wine, the symbol of freedom. We eat matzah, what we ate in Egypt and what we ate when leaving. That's the symbol of both, from freedom, from slavery to freedom. We reenact it as if we're there. That's what the Haggadah says. We have to imagine that we were there. We're reenacting those moments in history. That's the whole idea of the Yom HaShoah Haggadah, to try to get a tiny, tiny glimpse of it. So we wear the shirts worn in the death camps. We put on yellow stars, numbers on our wrists. We're going to eat the potatoes, the burnt potatoes. You don't even have to say a blessing over it because it's just not food. We're going to put into flames the Aleph Bays because so many books were burned then. Children, young children, we're reenacting, are going to separate from the parents and walk to the side of the room. It's a ritual. Ritual is simple. It does simple things that some may think is trite, but right behind the ritual there's deep, deep meaning. We're trying to re-experience that moment. On Shavuot, this holiday ritual, we don't only remember that God gave the Torah, we learn the Torah all night. We don't only remember that God protected us in the desert when we were in the booths, we build the booths and we go into the booths. And so I want to argue, as I heard from my dear friend, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, he should be well, that the mitzvah, I would say the mitzvah of ritual, the mitzvah, the commandment, is not the result of my belief in God. It may not be, but it may be the means through which I come to believe. This is not simple stuff. It's not that God commands and from the commandment I do. No, that's not what it is. It's the reverse. I do. And in the doing, I'm trying, in the holiday rituals, certainly through the mitzvah, I'm trying to re-experience God. And from the doing, I come to believe. The Talmud says, what would you answer, friends, dear friends, if the people come to God and say, we have a choice to believe or to do the mitzvot? Which should it be? And famously, the Talmud says, God says, Halavai oti azavu vet mitzvotai shamaru. Better that they leave me and do the mitzvot. From the mitzvah will come the belief. This is a fundamental difference between Christianity, which broke from Judaism. How did it break from Judaism? It broke from Judaism by saying, oh, the old covenant is it's a bunch of mitzvot. And look what that got you. It got you the destruction of the first temple and the second temple. We're going to create a new covenant. And the new covenant is going to shelve all of the mitzvot. And it's going to focus primarily on one idea, that God is God. Belief in Jesus. That's number one, number two, and number three. In Judaism, it's very, very critical, but it works in the reverse. The commandment doesn't necessarily come from God, but through the commandment, through the mitzvah, one can come to believe in God. That's why Jewish law is called halakha. Halakha is not a noun. Halakha is a verb from the word halach, to go. Where am I going? Where does the halakha take me? It takes me towards God. So when people have come to the Bayit and said, it's not for me, I don't believe, I often would say, come, let's experience a Seder together. Let's do Passover together. Let's do Shabbos together. Shabbos is an experience of feeling something, feeling that presence of God. That's the key. The mitzvah may not be the result of the belief, but it may be a means to come to belief. It's not that I love in a vacuum, but I experience a relationship. That's what the mitzvah is. The mitzvah is an experiential encounter with God. That's what it is. It's a love moment with God. And by experiencing my beloved, then I come to understand that I love my beloved. That's why I don't think the Aseret HaDibrot should be called in English the 10 Commandments. If it were the Aseret HaDibrot, it should be the Aseret HaMitzvot. It's Aseret HaDibrot, which means the 10 sayings or the 10 declarations, because the first one may not be a commandment. There may literally only be 9 commandments. Of course, the rabbis say that there's 613 in them, but they're pushing. When I look at the literal text, there are 9. There are 10 declarations, but there are 9 commandments. And that's why when we stand at Sinai, what do we say? Na'aseh v'nishma. What does na'aseh v'nishma means? We will do. We will do the mitzvah. We will do and experience the encounter. And from the na'aseh nishma, maybe we'll come to the realization of Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. The first time I met Ruth Bromberg, she had seen a sign, we're going to have the free service. And so she and Howard showed up at our free service when we didn't even have a building. We had like a little house in front of Henry Hudson Parkway. And I remember them being there and they were so immersed in the prayer. And I'm not sure and never asked whether they believed in God, but I do think through that experience, something happened. And that was the first thousands of times that they came and searched and became my teacher. Again, the mitzvah may not be the result of belief, but it may be the means through which one can come to believe. I want to stop here and get your thoughts, what you think about this.
So I see Tova's hand and Lance's hand. And then we have Ted and Arnie. Is that anyone else? Hold on. And then I'll write it in the chat so I remember. Okay, so we have Tova, Lance, Ted, and Arnie. Okay. Tova.
Okay. Rabbi, I mean, you touched on so many things. And I'd like to go back to the beginning when you spoke about Ahavah, and Rashi's comment saying, yes, God will be with you in times of trouble and take you out of trouble. And I think that the Living Torah teaches that. The Living Torah speaks to human need, and to be able to turn to somebody, that somebody is there in the time of our need, I think is essential to the human condition. We have to be reminded to be thankful when something good happens, but when something bad is there, we're ready to turn to God. We need that, we need help. And of course the mitzvot, I think, create community, and this is what you are always creating. And
Yes.
come out of the woodwork in time of trouble. You know, we lived in Clearwater, Florida at the time of the 6-Day War. And until that time, we didn't know how many Jews lived in that area. But once we were in deep trouble, everybody declared themselves Jews and declared that they want to help. Yeah.
I did see a little video where they were asking people on the street how many Jews there are in the world. It's actually a very funny video. 1.5 billion, you know. We are who we are. We're 15 million people, and goodness sakes. Lance, or was it Lance or
Yes.
Shula? Yes, my Lance.
Okay. In 2003, Rabbi Riskin wrote, I guess you call it a sermon, in which he suggested that Yom Kippur, instead of being a day of reflection, repentance, fasting, or whatever, should be a day of rejoicing.
Yes.
In other words,
yes.
You familiar with that article?
No, I did, and it's something that I've lived with. From the beginning, people were startled on Yom Kippur when I started dancing and singing, because
There you go.
It's not, I mean, you're not always given a second chance and a third chance. So it's a day of joy.
And Rabbi Riskin has a video about Hanukkah in which he points out that the Greeks believe that man is the measure of all things. However,
yes.
The Hebrews believe that God is the measure of all things.
Yes.
And just a final note, and that is in the movie Avatar, saying the Na'vi say, "I see you," which means I love you. And for me, seeing God, not faith in God, not belief in God, but seeing God is the key. In other words, Moses sees the burning bush, and he also sees the revelation of Mount Sinai. However, the burning bush, the revelation of Mount Sinai is an anthropomorphic theophany, which is a sort of human manifestation of God, whereas the burning bush is a hierophany, which is a manifestation of God in sort of everyday, normal things, profane things. For example, I am that I am, from the point of view of a mathematician or somebody who used to be a professor of computer science, is what we call a recursion. That's a scaled series. And that, along with a bazillion other things, are things that I see as manifestations of God right here, right now, within this moment of the class, within Rav Avi, within all of you who've spoken so wonderfully, from the beginning schmooze to the present moment.
Thank you, Lance. And I identify with that. One of the beauties of being here, just looking out and seeing God's world, I find that to be a very experiential moment.
I'd like to say something.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
I'd like to say something. Zalman, I'd like to say something.
Yes, Zalman, my dear Zalman.
I went to Hebrew school. I was taught by a man who was a Holocaust survivor. He was 29 years old. His name was Arthur Solomon. And, you know, you say we had to speak slowly. We had to read slowly. So I said, why do we have to? My father is blah, 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 blah. So he says, he takes off his shirt from his right arm, and you see all the numbers. They weren't lotto numbers. It was a Holocaust survivor. I know we were going to make it. He survived. Other people survived. They had children. They had other grandchildren. I knew we were going to make it. And my job was to keep saying, fighting against discrimination, anti-Semitism all my life. I was 6 years old when the Holocaust ended, but it continuously ended. So I said, I'm going to keep on fighting for Jewish people, and they're going to grow. They're going to grow. They didn't die. 6 million died. 100,000 lived, and they're going to have more children, more children, more children. And
yes.
Now we have around 40 million Jews. Some people don't believe they're Jews, but there's still 40 million Jews. Maybe 5 billion Jews. That's all. That's all. But
Yeah.
that's right.
Thank you, Zalman. Yeah.
I still hate numbers. They weren't lotto numbers.
Mm-hmm.
That's why God exists. I say
Yeah, thank God.
I never give
Yes.
up. I don't like somebody's happy. If you don't care about me sometimes, like,
Right.
oh, I shall fight.
Right,
I wish they would call me. I wish they would do it, right? I know God
right,
exists.
right. Vivian, did
He's
you
only
want to say
28, he's only
something?
28
I
years
think
old.
we have
See?
Ted and Arnie waiting, and then I saw
Okay.
Dan's hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay.
Ted, the Fetmans are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Oh,
There we go.
Um, okay, I'm a little bit confused by Rabbi's introductory remark about the Ten Commandments, where God, I'm not sure whether he said, "I will be God," or "I will be your God." In other words, the first aspect seems impossible situation. It's like my saying, "I will be Ted." It's possible to be, "I will be your Ted," if you name me as such, and if you recognize me as such, but not that I will be Ted. That's so I'd like a clarification
Right. I
on
love the
whether
way.
God is or is created by the people.
It's,
I have another
but Ted, you
point to
actually,
make about, if I may, Rabbi, complete my remarks. I also would like to say that death is made to be very appealing when one thinks that one will hear after death, because in life, personally speaking, I find it very hard to hear if people mumble, if they speak too quickly, if they speak too low for me. So the thought that in death I will hear everybody clearly, perhaps even without my hearing aids, sounds great. And finally, I would like to say that belief in God comes more easily if you are brought up to think that way as a child, and so you can accept it more quickly in adulthood. But if you were brought up not to believe in God, or that it's questionable whether there's a God, it takes more convincing when you are old. Those
I
are my
just
3 points.
said you spoke so beautifully, each of the points. I'll just comment on the first, and I jotted down exactly a phrase that you used. It's one thing to turn to Bev, if I may, and Ted, you would say to Bev, "I will be Ted." It's different, I believe, if you turn to Bev, as I know you do, and you would say, "Bev, I will be your Ted." The difference between "I will be Ted" is "I'm Ted." "I will be your Ted" means I'm there for you. It speaks to a relationship, a caring relationship, a relationship where people are reinforcing and supporting each other. That's what I believe God is saying. He's not saying, God is saying, "I will be with you." That's what "I will be your Ted" means. I will be, Bev, with you through it all, and you're going to be there for me. I've often thought that the real test of love is not only knowing that I love you, but I just know that you love me. It's a relationship. It's it's an experiential encounter that people who love one another have experienced. That's what God is saying. God is saying, you will experience me because I will be with you through this Egypt darkness, and I'm going to be with you through other Egypts. Does that resonate at all, Ted?
Certainly. Thank you, Rabbi. It
And-
clarifies your point.
And your other points are so well taken. So well taken. I pray that, as one also has hearing problems, that the day will one day come, we'll be able to hear without hearing aids. I hope Ruth heard. And when you're brought up with God, you're brought up with that belief, but that could be challenging too. There are many people who are brought up with God, and for different reasons, they can leave that belief. In the chapter 15 of the Song of Moses and Miriam, Shirat Moshe and Miriam, there are two ways that God is described. It's Ze Eli, God is my God, and then Elokei Avi, the God of my fathers, mothers. And I don't think it's a coincidence that parents who really can transmit love of God make sure that their children, they hear it from them, but they develop a personal relationship with God. That's the relationship with God that I think has a chance to continue on. But what we've done today is actually a very important teaching for the Bayit and in my theology. Again, I love God. I have within myself a profound belief in God, but I sit in judgment of no one. And do believe, as we've been saying over and over, that in Judaism, I'd go so far as to say that it's not the top of the hierarchy. The top of the hierarchy is do the mitzvah, and the mitzvah is not just the ritual; it's the interpersonal relationships. It's, when I see people, when I look at the Bayit and the work that we're doing for refugees and the work that we're doing here and there, and the work we're doing for our people in need, that's the vehicle. I often think, what is it that makes, I'm looking at all of you, what is it that makes so many of you give of yourself so much? It's the way of the animal world is animals take, they don't give. And human beings take too, believe me. And too often
That's
are
right.
selfish. But what is it? What is it that inspires people to give? And I believe what inspires people to give is that we each have within us a little bit of God. And it's that part of God that inspires us to give of ourselves to others. That part of God within us, and I believe with help from the God above, to very different religious model. Stephen, I wanted to ask you, do you have any thoughts on this, Steve?
Rabbi, we still have two people waiting, Arnie and Dan Langer.
Okay, and then Steve, if you don't mind, you'll end off if that's okay with you. Only if you
Sorry.
wish.
It's a wonderful thought and a beautiful analysis of the Ten Commandments. I also agree that doing mitzvah is just so important for all of us to be involved with, and it's really doing God's work. And the thought that we have a little bit of God in us is very inspirational to me, and it speaks to me very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I do think that's the most important concept in the Torah, that every human being is created in the image of God. Every human being.
Arnie.
My Arnie.
So, like Tova said, this was such wide-ranging teaching that you gave, and I thought it was great. I do have a couple of disparate points to make.
Please, Arnie.
One, you began by saying that belief in God is a feeling and so can't be commanded. But there are other of the 10 commandments or statements that also are feelings, like do not covet. So, you know, it's there. So that's one thing. Two, the airlift.
Arnie, I'm looking down, taking notes, please.
Okay. To the airlift of Ethiopians and Russians to freedom was done at least visibly by people, whereas we're told in the Exodus, God lifted the nation out of the belly of Egypt. So there's a big difference between the two exoduses, or the three exoduses. Three, I think, I've talked with you about this. I think God has a sense of humor. And, you know, with all the talk about Mount Sinai, the first experience of Mount Sinai was glorious, but it failed. It was the second one when God was very humble and quiet that succeeded. Fourth, I guess the belief in God. I don't know if it's commandment or not, but I know one thing that's different in that really is,
It's for lunch,
I think,
and then drive me to the wine.
I think is really at the heart of this parsha, is that Judaism is both secular and universal. So we, the Jewish people, are given the 10 commandments, or the 10 statements. But at the same time, the parsha is named, it's one of the parshas that's named for a non-Jewish person. I read somewhere that the words Baruch Hashem, which are so emblematic of the Jewish people, appears in this parsha, and who says it? Yitro. And I don't remember who said this, but it's not me. The other, it's mentioned a few times in the Bible, and each time by a non-Jewish person. I think Noah is the first who says it. So it's universal and it's particular. And lastly, on a personal note, I have 2 sons, and they're both, to different extents, educated at great universities. And while at the universities, they became progressives to different extents. One of my sons, who's very progressive and tells me, you know, he doesn't believe in God, he believes the gap theory. Yet at the same time, he makes sandwiches in his house and he brings them down to the homeless people in his neighborhood. He knows the homeless people by name, and he not only gives them sandwiches, but he talks to them and pays attention to them. He doesn't walk by them without, you know, seeing them. He does a million things like that. He donates his time to a food pantry. I could go on, but you get the picture. He's a wonderful neshama. So anyway, I don't know what to make of that, except I love both my sons very much, and I'm very proud of them. And that's that.
As usual, as usual, Arnie, that's not that's everything. There's so much that you've said. I'll just make one comment that part of experiencing God is that as we mature, God, as we mature as individuals, as we mature as people, part of the experience of God is that God steps back and he expects of us more. So you're absolutely right that in Egypt, God takes us out of Egypt. It was as if we as a nation had just come through the canal and were breathing our first breaths of freedom. And so God had to do it all for us. But as we mature, just like I'm looking at Ilana now, when Ilana was a little girl, she assumed just so much responsibility. Now she has the world on top of her shoulders. That too is experiencing God, that like a parent can step back, make space for their children, and what their children do, they do in their own way, but it goes back to those lead moments. And I do believe, Arnie, that when your beautiful children, when they know the names of the homeless, these are godly acts. And I think they're expressing the deepest sense of what God is about. These are godly acts. The rabbis say, Mahurachum afatarachum. When we're merciful, it's an imitatio Dei of God's mercy. When we're kind, it's an imitatio Dei of God's kindness. As I mentioned before, we all have a little bit of God in us, and giving, just the act of giving, runs contrary to what many people do. What is it that inspires people to give? What is it that inspires your beautiful children to do what they do? Now, this is my leap of faith as a theologian. I believe it's a God from above and the God within us. And that, I think, allows us to do things beyond what we would ever imagine one can do. Because as God is so big, colossal, transcendent, beyond the imagination, so too we have strength within ourselves to do things we never ever thought we can do. And that capacity, I think, is a mirror reflection of what God is about. So when I look at your children doing what they're doing, they'll always be your children, no matter how old. I see in their acts of godliness. They learned that from you. They learned that from Debbie. Because what you were doing, they were acts of godliness as well. God's not going to feed the homeless. We have to do God's work. You've heard me talk about our covenantal partnership. With this, I'll end the story of the two people I have on my desk talking to each other. And A says to B, I'm so upset with God. I want to ask God, how come there's so much poverty in the world? How come there's so much sickness? How come there's so much racism? How come there's so much violence? So person two says to person one, why don't you ask that question? And person one says, because I'm afraid God's going to ask me the same question. Just some thoughts.
Rabbi.
Yes.
So Rav Ezra is not teaching today, and I know that Dan Langer was waiting to say something, and Ilana Weinstein also had her hand up. Do you want to just take two more comments?
Yes. And then I've got to help my wife, my holy wife, pack, so that I not only will be Avi, but I will be, as Ted taught us today, I will be your Avi.
Did we lose Dan? I don't see Daniel Langer. So I think Ilana, do you want to make a quick note?
Sure. Yeah, I want to say that it's a interesting generational shift, because I'm one of the few people I know of my friends who actually believes in God, and I know that my belief is definitely very different than like my parents or like other like adults in my life. And it's really interesting because my friends, even my friends who don't believe in God, are still doing so much good in life and giving back to the community in so many different ways, where it ties back. It's more of a feeling than necessarily like knowing something is there.
Yeah, right. It depends the way you look at it. I look at your friends as, and I respect what they're saying. I don't want to put words into them, but when I look at your friends, when I look at the holy work that you do, taking care of the animal world, the nature world, these are very godly acts. There's a very, very slight difference between the one who says, I don't have that God belief in what I'm saying. So I'm very proud that at the Bayit, there are going to be people like your friends who are very comfortable. You know, there's not a checklist, do you believe in God or not? It's not the way it is. So I want to just extend my love to everyone. I do, if you have a chance, Julie, I would like to send to everybody the piece that I did in this symposium. Maybe we can send the whole symposium, and this we publicize. I've never done this ever in my rabbinate, but to have a session on who wrote the Torah. And
That's
it
a
could be
big one.
It could be a lot of fun. And so let's give it a shot. And,
For next week?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, but please don't feel any pressure to read it. You know, what I wrote can bore you to death.
Rabbi, I just wanted to make sure that I don't have to depend on Fern every week to send me, can I just add my email to Shuli? Is that who I
Yeah.
should?
Send it to me. I actually added you to the Buy It mailing list during the class.
Oh,
So
excellent.
you should receive it, but anyone who wants to join the class, if you go to thebuyit.org/classes, you find the link to all the classes throughout the week, which everyone is welcome to attend. So I can also send that to you directly.
That would be great.
Shuli, I would love the opportunity just to get to know those from Shar Shamayim who are joining us. So maybe separate from our class, we can have like a separate introductory Zoom. And so then we can.
I'll ask Rabbi Fishman about that.
Okay.
Thank
I love you
Shuli.
all. You should know that we're going to Boca today. And so people said to me, well, you'll cancel the class. I said, no. I'm not canceling the class. I pray in the morning. I got to teach my class. This is number one. So I just didn't want to go a week without having the honor of connecting with you. And it's just an honor. Just, we love you. And may Ruth Bromberg, may she rest in peace. Country road, take me home to the place I belong, to the Bayit Yerushalayim, with my Howard, take me home. Love you all. Love you.
Shula.